Welcome back to the Growing Band Director Podcast. This is episode number 143. I'm super excited to be here with Bobby Lambert from Wando High School. Also works with Music for All, has a company, Lambert Leadership and Dynamic Marching, and has a podcast, and it's called That Band Life, which I just found out about. And thanks for being on here with me.
It's my pleasure, Kyle. Thanks for having me.
Will you tell some people about your podcast?
Sure. That Band Life started about a year and a half ago. And it was a little bit of an extension out of, actually longer than that now that I think about it, almost into COVID times. Mm-hmm. It was a little bit of an extension of Dynamic Marching, which is a company that Jeff Young and I work together with. And we wanted to reach people where they were and acknowledge what COVID was doing to everyone. And it went over really very well. And so we decided to continue it on a very irregular basis. And I can best describe it as like, if you ever listen to the old radio show, Car Talk, it was this NPR show with these two very thickly accented Boston former, well, they were really actors, but they pretended to be car repair enthusiasts. Mm-hmm. And people would call in with the craziest questions, and it just hilarity ensued. And so we have talked about how much band information you can get off of Reddit. We have talked about how... Exactly. I keep telling Jeff, I don't think you're using Reddit right. I don't think that's the right place to go. We've talked, our highest selling item at Dynamic Marching is shockingly plume cases. We sell a surprising amount of plume bags. And so we've joked about that several times. So it's a very irreverent look at sometimes the hard parts of being a band director.
So about a year ago was actually the first time that I had heard your name, and I was doing an episode with Ed Protzman, who was at William Mason and is now at Portland State University, I think.
I believe that's right. Yeah.
So the podcast was about their upcoming. They had just placed, I think, 5th in Bands of America, and then 6 weeks later we're going to Midwest, and I was kind of highlighting a program that can do that and how amazing that is. And near the end, I asked him about a program and somebody around the country who I should know about, who I don't know about, and he dropped your name. So,
oh wow,
yeah, it's been kind of a year in the making.
Well, I'm honored. Ed and all of the directors at Mason, Avius, Jason, Zach, all of those folks are just incredible people, and I've gotten to go work with them. Once doing a symphonic camp, and once judging the concert festival that they host through Music for All. And I mean, just class act in everything that they do. So classy. I still have some of the caramel candies that they put in the dish for all the judges there. I mean, like, it's just, I'm being facetious because I say that because they were that detailed in everything that they did. They wanted to make sure that everyone was cared for. And I think they do the exact same thing with their students. So that's why they're so successful. They're smart and they care.
So I got to be honest, I have my iPad with my notes on it, and my kids used it for something this morning, and now it's on 11%. I'm like, okay, it's not going to make it. So, but the only cord I can find is off here to the side, and it's like one of these short little ones. So every time I look away from you, it's not that I'm following a cat or something.
You know what? I'm used to people having to avert their eyes after looking at me for too long. I totally get it. All of my family has to do the same thing. I totally get it.
So I want to do sort of a leadership teaser, not necessarily start all with the leadership stuff, but
sure.
Just talking about, so there are some people who are natural leaders. However, I think people think you're either a leader or you're not. However, I think people need to know that you can grow into your leadership. So I had a couple questions for you.
Sure.
So thinking about band directors who are listening right now and thinking about the kids in their program, how do you know when someone is ready to become a leader?
Well, that's a really good question. The real truth is you don't. Some of the best leadership experiences have come to students who weren't ready, and they rose to the occasion. I would say personally, myself, I was not ready to be the assistant band director at Marian Catholic High School in 2000. Not even a little bit. But that, I think that we and students the same way, we look at a situation and there is pressure, there is tension, there is a lacking somewhere, whether it's knowledge, experience, whatever. And our going through that gauntlet creates the wealth of knowledge that it takes to be a leader. So when you say, is someone ready to be a leader? No, because you can't be ready to be a leader without being a leader. Now, the only thing that I would add to that is I think that everyone is a leader. You led yourself. You woke up this morning. You got dressed. You made choices. When I designed the leadership program for Marian Catholic for the school, the whole first year is about self-awareness translated into self-leadership. So as I've been asked this question a lot of times, what do you look for in a leader? I'll be very honest with you, breathing. Mm-hmm. That's it. If you had, I can think back to 5 leaders just off the top of my head that if you had said, do you think they're going to be a great leader? It's absolutely not even a little bit. And they turned into that because, like we said, they went through those trials and those tribulations and those lackings, and they grew into something maybe they had no idea about and something I had no idea about. I don't think there's a magic formula except for support. When you put someone into a leadership position, you have to let them know for a while that you're their safety net, and you're going to support not only their trying and their successes, but you're going to support their failures as well. Some of my best conversations and some of the most fertile leadership conversations have come from a student failing. And I would resound that by saying some of my most growing periods of life have come right after failures. So to go back to wrap that question up, what do I look for in a leader, or what are the things that it take to be, when is a student ready to be a leader? They're not. You have to help them and guide them through those really tough first interactions as a leader. And sometimes they find out, I don't want to do that. You know what? Totally okay. But they're a better person having gone through that gauntlet. I tell kids, if the only thing that you get better at is being in a college scholarship interview through the leadership program, then we've won. That's huge. Most kids are not getting that in their activities, but we are giving you a way to find out more about yourself. Because I guarantee you, one of the questions that they're going to ask you is, tell us about your greatest weakness. And if you go through leadership and you find, you know what, I'm not great at encouraging others. I'm not great at some of these things. I bet they're going to find, though, that they got better. But let's say that they decide that's really not for them. They still are a much more aware human being, which I think is a win for us as teachers.
There was a Dr. Tim video. It's probably from the early 90s that I showed my kids so many times. And I actually had it taken from a VHS and then put onto a CD. And at one point he says something to the effect of, if you have a jerk in your band, if you can't trust that kid, don't put them in a leadership position. So there are those kids that, like, how do you know when to push? I'm also a Patriots fan. We're falling on hard times right now, but it's been a good long run. And Bill Belichick always would say, if I'm going to lose, I'm going to lose with this player because I know what I'm going to get from that player, and I can trust them. So do you feel like you have to be able to trust a certain kid to be able to start putting them through that, or can they earn your trust through it?
I think it's a little bit of both. I would then, maybe I've just been sheltered. I've dealt with a lot of different kinds of kids, especially as I've done clinics across the country. And I've found that when a kid is defiant, it has very little to do with me and much more to do with them. And I feel called to talk with them and be like, okay, what's going on? Well, I just don't like this. I mean, I've been faced with that. I just think this is stupid. Okay, fair enough. Tell me what part of it specifically is stupid. All of it. Okay. What I think we're trying to do here is to make band more fun, more enjoyable, and more productive and successful. What part of that is bad, do you think? And usually the answer that I'll get back is, well, I can't do anything about that. Oh, wrong. You actually can do more about it than I can.
Mhm.
Did you notice this morning when you tried to redirect the room? You did. Did you notice that when you made a big deal of something, it was like you're already a leader? That's the thing that people don't understand. The jerks, as we want to maybe label them, are some of the strongest leaders that we have. And if we can point them into a direction where they see their power and see their worth, those are some of the kids I was telling you about, the five people that I can just think off the top of my head. There's a young man named Matt who was a tenor saxophone player in our band at Marian, who was a jerk. He was. And we usually just, if you were the oldest senior or the highest ranking senior, you became the section leader. There wasn't an application process. Greg Bim, there was no leadership application. There was no interview. If this was you, if you were a senior, you were a leader. You had responsibilities, and it was just the way that it was. And we actually did not name him as section leader at first because he was so irreverent. That's probably the best word. He wasn't mean, but you couldn't trust him. I mean, he just was all over the place. And we brought him in at the summer when we posted everything. We want you to understand why we did this. And he was a bit disappointed. But we gave him an opening. We said, if this summer in our rehearsals, you prove to us that you do care about these other people, because that's the bottom line. We're not interested in how well you can teach tenor saxophone. He wasn't the best player. We're not caring how much you can march or how well you can march. He wasn't the best marcher. We care how much you care about these other people. And once he sort of started to understand that, his whole demeanor changed. And he became one of the best section leaders we ever had. So good that for the next year and the next year, really great kids were much better leaders because of him. I think the true value in a section leader isn't found in the year that they're there. It's the year that they've left. That's when you find out how good those section leaders were. So all that to say, yes, of course there's trust. But as we all know, if I look back at myself as a high school student, I was a jerk. I absolutely was a jerk. But people kept taking and giving chances with me to figure out, okay, I'm not really a jerk. The real truth is I am wildly insecure and incredibly, probably narcissistic at the time. And I just needed somebody to believe in me enough times to show me that I could take that and point it outward and do some really great things with it.
So if people listening don't have any sort of leadership program, but like, what's one tangible thing that they could do with some of their students to start down this journey? Like an opening activity or...
Absolutely. Here's exactly what I would do. I would get my older students in the room and I would say, let's talk about leadership. What does that mean to you? Give me a couple of words that when I say leadership, what do you think? And their impressions of leadership are probably going to be wildly different than yours. And just list those on the board and then say, okay, I want you to think about any kind of leader that you've experienced, whether it be a teacher, maybe somebody from your church, maybe someone from scouting, someone at your work, maybe in your family. And I want you to talk to me about what they do as leaders that has made an impression upon you. What has affected you, positively or negatively? See, the positive ones can kind of dribble out, but those negative leadership experiences, they're word vomiting about that because they're so impactful. And then we start to talk about, well, what if we could, because it's obviously affected all of you in a really specific manner. What if we could harness that and create a program, a cycle, a group of students that could use those influences, which I think that's, if you ask my definition of leadership, it's just influence, nothing more. If we could harness that influence and point it in a single direction together, what do you think that would do to the band? So there's your three questions. Number one, what do you think leadership is? Number two, tell me an experience, positive or negative, that you've had with a leader. Could be a peer leader, could be a teacher. Again, it doesn't matter. And the kids will will, again, word vomit. They'll be very verbose about those experiences, especially the bad ones. And then the third one's, what if we could harness that? What are some ways in which you think we could do this? And it could start very simply of saying, okay, our job is going to be attendance is always taken in the first 2 minutes by the section leader, by whoever we designate. And that's going to be the first place where we start. And that's going to be a responsibility. May not seem like a lot, but it's a lot. And I'm going to count on you to do just that. And it's okay. We start to get that moving. Okay. The next thing is I need some help lining the field. Can I have a few people stay after? Okay. And then I'm going to start to back away from that. I used to hate lining the field. It was just an arduous process that I could not stand. And we were in the process of finishing it. I had been working all day, and I had some kids after school helping me with it. And all we'd done is laid down the corners by that point. We'd gotten the measurements right, and we'd laid out but the lining of it had not begun. And I got a call from my wife, who was pregnant at the time, and she had a blood pressure scare. And I was like, guys, I got to go. I'm out. So I was gone for a couple of days. And I come back, and I look at the practice field's done. And I was like, Greg, I'm so sorry I left you with the practice field. I'm sorry you had to go and line that. He's like, I didn't line it. And I went to a kid, Jeremy Turner, never forget. He's actually the assistant band director at Marian Catholic right now, which is pretty cool. I went to him and I said, Jeremy, how'd you guys do this? He was like, oh, it was easy. We just looked it up. We looked up a YouTube video. We finished squaring the corners, and we laid down the lines. Is it okay? Does it look great? I was like about to cry. I could, but that lesson taught me kids love ownership, and kids love mastery. They love being good at something. They love owning what they're part of. And from that point on, Bobby Lambert never lined a field again, ever. And because I saw how empowered these kids could get by allowing them to do something that I hated. I think that's why I'm still teaching. I see so many of my colleagues that are out of it now because they burn themselves out. Yeah. You don't burn yourself out conducting persecuting. You burn yourself out lining fields. And I mean that figuratively. You burn yourself out on the things that you hate doing, whether that's, organizing music or setting up and tearing down chairs or whatever. I made a decision a long time ago that I'm not going to do that. If someone else can do it, I want them to do it. Not because I'm lazy. I'll do the job. I've done it a lot of times. I don't need to do it anymore. But if somebody else can do it and become empowered by it, I want to hand that over.
I didn't.
So I hope those. No, sorry. Go ahead. I hope those three questions can kind of lead and spark some people who don't have a leadership program.
I did an interview with Brian Christian, who just retired down in Texas, and it's going to come out. He's
terrible. The band was awful. I mean, like Vista Ridge. Come on. No, Brian's a dear friend. We serve on the slam board together.
He said, what was the quote that he had gotten from a mentor that don't do anything in your program that somebody else can do?
That's right.
Because it frees you up to do the things that only you can do.
Only you can do. That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah, so, and I think for directors, that's a big deal. That's something that there's so many directors who are willing to sacrifice, and that's wonderful. But when you sacrifice everything and you have nothing left to give, especially to your family, I'm not sure what we've proven.
So speaking of leaders and mentors, who are some of the mentors in your life?
There are 5 that I can come up with easily. Number 1 and 2 are my mom and dad. We come from very rural North Carolina. In fact, the Cherokee Indian Reservation in Western North Carolina. My dad is Native American. And so we did not have very much. I was the 5th of 5 boys growing up. No musical anything. We sang at church. That was the only musical background that I ever had. So much so we didn't even really have radio stations. Like it's that bad. But the 2 of them showed me that no matter the circumstance. Just keep your head down and keep working, and things get better. And the second part of it is making something from nothing. I saw over and over in my upbringing that a desire to make good things happen and surround yourself with good people tend to make great things happen. And those, my mom and dad certainly showed me that. Next would be my college band director, Bob Buckner. Bob was the athletic band director at Western Carolina University for a number of years. And he's the first person to teach me that you can go outside North Carolina. That sounds strange, but I never had until him. And he took me to the BOA Summer Symposium. It's one of the reasons why I'm really devoted to that particular camp, because that was the first time that I saw a drum corps. It was the first time that I saw great high school band opportunities and people who were as passionate about teaching as I thought I was alone in that. But it was like Disney World. You know, when you go to Disney, everybody's all about Disney. And when you go to the BOA Summer Symposium, everybody's about band. And that's thrilling. I love it. But not just that. Bob also taught me that your students deserve respect and care, even when it hurts. And I say that because Bob was always willing to tell me the truth. Other teachers or other people would, oh, Bobby, that was really good. It was really good. Bob would say, you know, that wasn't good. But now let's figure out why. What wasn't good? Let's do this. He made me drum major at Western Carolina University, having zero drum major experience. Also, having never even marched in the band. I think he sort of forgot that I wasn't there my freshman year, but he denies it. He just says, oh, I could tell that you were going to be a really good drum major. I'm like, Bob, you're full of crap. No, but that's another one of those experiences where someone trusted me with something I probably was not ready for. And yet he saw something in me, or he just knew that he would care for me enough to make it through, that we would make it happen. And we did. We started the summer symposium at Western Carolina University in 1997, which is still going on now. And we had a bunch of college kids and Bob running the summer camp, which was ludicrous, but amazing at the same time. So Bob really taught me about going past boundaries, personal boundaries. Mm-hmm. Next would be Lynn Clark. He was my saxophone professor at the University of Massachusetts. Mr. Clark taught me that music demands everything you can give it. And the composer has to be honored in everything that you do, or you shouldn't perform it. And when you look at performing music that way, as opposed to just notes and rhythms, when you look at it as someone's blood, sweat, and tears, pun intended, when you look at it more as that, it changes your approach. And so I still do that to this day. Like we're working on Enigma Variations right now with our top band, and just reading about Elgar, like I want to get into his head and find out more ways that I can advocate for him and his work in what we're doing. Mr. Clark, invaluable. Like I did not know, I don't think I truly understood music until Mr. Clark. And then finally, Greg Bim, who was, the head director at Marian Catholic for 45 years, I think it is, 45, 46. I just remember thinking I was one when he went to Marian Catholic. And I can't even begin to tell you what I learned from him. I learned that where Mr. Clark told me the music was everything, Greg Bim taught me the music is only a small part. And that it's weird that I can say those two things together, but that's the truth. The music is very important, but the people involved are the most important thing. And we have to get them to find that respect and honesty with the music rather than just force or demand or whatever. Greg was, his talks with the kids were legendary. You knew there was a stool that sat behind him, He'd be like, I need everybody in the band room, which we usually weren't. We were always sections and things. I need everybody in the band room. He'd set his stool down and he'd have his coffee right there on the counter, like you have your drink right there. And I just remember, like, even the adults, we were sitting in the back of the room just hanging on every word. There wasn't anger there. It was true care. I can remember the very first story I saw from him. I won't go into all the details, but it basically was a thing. I was teaching visual, and I had no business doing it, by the way, because they were the national champions. They were the reigning national champions. And we'd done 3 days of visual with me, and he drove out. And this was an afternoon, so we'd done a morning block and an afternoon block. He drove out, said, Bobby, I need to talk to everybody right now. And I thought, oh, God. Here it is. He's going to fire me in front of everyone and say, you guys suck right now. Like, this is awful. You're the national champions. You've got to. He brought out a big McDonald's bag and he pulled 3 smaller bags and wrappers out of the bag. He said, I want to tell you all about Lee Porter. Lee Porter was the maintenance person here at Marian Catholic for many years, a Vietnam veteran, grandfather, father, amazing human being. And he went very in depth about a story where people took great advantage of Lee Porter and asked him to do something so vile. It was just disgusting what the construction people had done and what Lee was forced to clean up. And he said, can you put yourself in the place of Lee Porter right now? All the kids were like, yeah, that would be awful. He goes, can you put yourself in the place of the construction people who desecrated, I'll use that word, this area that Lee had to attend to. And the kids were like, they just sort of sat and stared. He goes, because that's who you're like when you leave trash out and around the band room. You are no better than the construction workers who defecated and did this in this space. And that's not who we want to be. Do we all understand? And all the kids are like, oh God. He was more concerned about the way they treated the band room than our 8 to 5. And that spoke volumes to me. I can remember those first years being like, I don't know what to talk about with the kids because Greg's going to talk about like the way they entered the room talking too much. And I'm trying to get the B flat in tune and I just don't know what I'm supposed to do. But he taught me, like, those mentors, those 5 people conglomerated into, I think, a well-balanced, well, I don't know if I want to call myself well-balanced, but they gave me the tools to really, really elevate myself. And I think the biggest thing they gave me is I can see people's strengths. And I think that's, you know, when people ask me, will you come in and do a motivational speak? I don't know how to do one. I have no idea. I don't know what that even is. But what I can do is come in and get to know your kids pretty quickly. And I can find their strengths pretty fast. And we start to just expand upon those, you know, accentuate the positive, eliminate the negatives. Mm-hmm. Like that's kind of what my niche is. So, that was a really long question. Long answer. I'm sorry.
That's what I asked for. It's perfect. When you mentioned Greg Bim, you know, you're talking about one of the legendary teachers in the country, and you mentioned Marian Catholic. I know he just retired recently. So I'm curious how did you get, you're from North Carolina, and how did you get hooked up in Chicago with Marian Catholic and Greg Bim? How did that happen?
Well, okay, 2 of those mentors. Greg started looking for an assistant after Mark Whitlock had decided to leave to go and open a little school called Hebron in Texas. And he had said, I really want a woodwind person. And we didn't post things then on the internet, not in the same way, or you posted them, but it wasn't Facebook or all that. And so just started calling people with whom he had connections. Bob Buckner had actually taught Marian Catholic at the Summer Symposium in 1988. And Greg will tell you, that's what changed the course of the entire program. He learned so much from Bob that summer. He calls Bob Buckner and he says, hey, I'm looking for somebody. Do you have anybody in mind? He goes, well, as a matter of fact, I have a former student. He was drum major here for 3 years. His name's Bobby Lambert. He's studying saxophone right now. And great. Well, then he starts calling the clinicians from the BOA Summer Symposium, and Lynn Clock happened to be the saxophone person for the concert band. Hey, I have this person, Bobby Lambert. And when these two people, very ensconced in the marching arts and very levelly or very much embraced in the concert community, when those two people said one person's name, he reached out. Now, that's the nice version of that. The crappy version is I'd already been turned down by 3 different high schools
Mhm.
that I won't mention here because nobody would know them. So it was a thing where I'd gotten turned down by these local schools where I was living. And then Greg Bibb from Marian Catholic calls. So, okay.
Yeah.
I actually drove Bob's car to Illinois that summer. I drove them to the summer symposium and they let me take it on up to Chicago Heights. I did the interview, drove back, and flew back home. Uh, it was a whirlwind experience. That's how I got there.
So you were there until 2014 when you went to Wando?
I did, yeah. Scott Rush had been at several summer camps that I had been, and
Mhm.
he had been looking to move into a more administrative position, a director of fine arts, for a while. And he thought that was going to happen in 2013, and he saw me at the summer symposium. That was the first year I took over the Drum Major Institute. And he came up to me after and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about leaving Wando." And I knew who they were because I remember seeing them play at Midwest in 2007 and then make Grand National Finals in 2009. And growing up in North Carolina, Irmo was pretty strong. A couple of schools in North Carolina were pretty strong, but we were not known for powerhouses, especially in both marching and concert.
Hmm.
And when I heard of this Wando school, first of all, it has a weirdo name. But when I had heard about this school, I really kind of got interested. And I read Scott's books, The Habits of a Successful Band Director, and they were fantastic. I used them quite a bit. And when he said, "Hey, I'm looking at leaving. Would you be interested in coming to South Carolina?" Um, Charleston? Yeah, definitely. I would be very interested. And it started from there, and it took about a year and a half to go through. Um, and it did. And I've been really happy.
Was there any I guess what's the word I'm looking for? Um, did you guys overlap at all? Were you there while he was there and then left, or did he leave and you came and took over? And
That's actually a really interesting story. He did get a job nearby, actually, just in the next district above us or west of us. He became a fine arts coordinator there, so he was very close and would drop by a bit in those first few months, really first few years, and still does. He was at our band contest in September. He's come to our concerts when we played Midwest in 2019. He was very much there. We had a piece commissioned for him called Head Rush by Jay Bocook. But the biggest thing I can tell you from that is Scott really the program was good before Scott got there, but Scott really put all the gears in motion. And just had the jazz bands were good, the chamber groups were good, the concert band was good, the marching band was good. It was just incredible, all the things that were happening there. And that was a bit daunting when I first looked at it. And I can remember meeting the kid. Well, first of all, I met the staff and we hit it off really very fast. Lainey Radicke is one of the other band directors at Wando, and she's fantastic. I mean, just amazing. At the time, it was Jeff Handel was also one of the other directors, but Michael Gray was there. Tim Cole was there. Like just a lot of great people. And the first time I met all the kids, we came in and sat down, and I felt like Greg Bim kind of coming full circle right here. And I said, I have a few things I want to tell you today. Number one, I'll tell you, I'm Bobby Lambert. Here's where I'm from. Here's what I've done. None of that really matters. Here's what I really need you to know. Number one, I'm not as good as Scott Rush. I fully admit it. I know it. You don't have to wonder about it. So now I've already established I'm not as good as Scott Rush. However, Bobby Lambert, Lainey Radicke, Jeff Handel, Michael Gray, Tim Cole, Sarah, well, she got married. I just lost her name. Oh my gosh. Sarah Price. Thank you. Sarah Price, all these, now M. Holtz. I said, all of us are better than any one band director ever thought about being. And Mr. Rush would agree. So We together are going to do this, but we need one more thing. I don't know the history and the traditions that you do. And so when I miss them, not if, but when I miss them, it's not intentional. And I need you to be strong enough to come to my office and say, hey, Mr. Lambert, this happened and we should have done it like this. I'll either answer with one of two ways. Number one, I hear you. I think we want to go in a slightly different direction, and here's why. I hope you can support that. Or number two, the answer will be, oh, crap. I'm so sorry. We'll fix it. How can we fix it? Help me fix it. So you have to take a more active role in our program than you may have with Mr. Rush to keep it as good as Mr. Rush made it. And we went on from there, and we talked about some ways that we wanted to do that. But that's how that transition happened. And I think we hit the ground running. We went to Grand Nationals that first year and did okay. A lot of good things.
That's really hard when you take over a strong program, right? That seems like a masterful way to get the kids to buy in pretty quickly.
I wish I could tell you I planned it. It was more out of fear. Yep. But I found that when I am scared of something, honesty is my only course. Mm-hmm. Like, hey, I'm scared right now. This is scary.
And people say that when you're honest, there's less to remember.
That's right. That's right. I am not good at facades. I'm kind of, this is what you get. What you see is what you get. I've never been good at that, at pomp and circumstance. But I do think that sincerity wins the day. And I talk with, to go back and bring it again, one more circle. I talk to students and they say, what's the most important trait or quality in a leader? And I say it's sincerity. Because we can talk to you about the right words. We can talk to you about the right methods. We can talk to you about the right pedagogy. But at the end of the day, if you sincerely want to do what's right for the people in your charge, you will be a good leader. You just will.
Well, it makes me happy to hear that your program is so well-rounded. You mentioned all the different type of ensembles, because I hear all these great groups, and so often you hear maybe they don't have a concert program very often, or maybe they don't have a jazz band, or so they don't do chamber music. I mean, you hit my four things on that. So what is Wando like now? How's it different? How's it the same? For somebody who knows nothing about Wando High School. I wasn't at Midwest 2019. I didn't hear your performance.
Okay.
Tell us about your
I think if you're asking me specifically what's different between our time versus maybe when Scott was there, I would say that they were kind of an emerging program at the time. There were things that were new. It's our first time making Grand National Finals. It's our first time winning state championships. It's our first time playing the state convention. It's some of those things. Whereas now we've been through a few of those things, and they're still special because they're new kids. But there's that. But the thing I'm actually proudest of, let's see, what's the right way to say this? The way that we built Wando, and I use that pronoun very intentionally now. The way that we built Wando is Jeff Handel and Laney Radke and I sat down 10 years ago and said, what works, what doesn't? And we found some things that were not working, and they were a little bit, Scott had been there for so long, and everyone else came many years after that. He had things that he did, and he was used to being there by himself. And so there were a lot of things that fell to him to do. And then some of the ancillary things were what was given out to the other directors. And I mean, no disrespect by that. Like, I completely understand. I would say that that's a bit of how it was with Greg and me at Marian. But the thing that Greg did transition to, and the thing that we started with at Wando, was, what do you want to do? Laney Radke's a brilliant pedagogue and rehearser. She'd never stood in front of the marching band up to that point. Okay, that's easy. You now are in charge of the music. You need to make us sound great. And at first she was very hesitant about that, but then she took over and did beautifully. You're going to take over the second concert band. It had been Scott did the top two and she did the bottom two. We flipped it around, so I do 1 and 3, she does 2 and 4. We actually even renamed the idea of what our bands are. We talk about the premier ensembles at Wando, and the top 2 bands are part of that package. We talked to Jeff about, where are you performing? Where have you taken the percussion and the jazz bands to perform? He's like, well, we do CPA, which is our concert assessment, and we do our home concerts here. No, we can go bigger. What do you want to do? What would you like to do? Well, I'd like to play the state convention. Okay. And so he did with both groups in different years. I want to do this with the jazz band. And we were actually pointed to some things right before COVID, playing at the Jazz Educators musical conference. Like, we wanted to play at that, and we were pointed toward that. So I think that, again, coming back to, I see people's strengths and I help them to flourish. That's exactly what we did with each staff member at Wando. So to come back around, I think that Wando is a very balanced program across the way, and it's not hanging on Bobby Lambert. Give you a good thought about that. My father passed away 2 years ago, and he passed away in December, but had Alzheimer's for many years, and we had decided to change his medication, take him off of some of it. And so my brothers had said, if you want to have any kind of conversation with him, you've got to come in these 2 weeks in October. Now, October for marching band people, everybody knows that's deadly. But I left. I talked with the staff, and they were like, you've got to go. I wasn't there as much for my mom, and I regret it still to this day. And so I said, I'm not going to do that again. And they said, no, you got to go. So I was gone from Sunday to Sunday, meaning I missed Monday, Tuesday, Thursday rehearsal, Friday night football game, Saturday full rehearsal, and I was back. And I remember I was standing in the copy room in our band room, and my head drum major comes in, brilliant kid. He was a junior at the time, making copies. And I said, hey, Brendan, how are you doing? He goes, I'm doing great. I said, hey, how were rehearsals last week? He looked at me. He was like, what do you mean? Because he was expecting some sort of loaded question.
He didn't realize you were gone. He never realized you were gone.
He didn't realize I was gone.
Wow.
And the first minute of that, I was like, oh, no. And then after it settled in, I was like, oh, yes. Yeah. And so we do that now. Like, I don't even get in front of the marching band until mid-September. Tim and Laney really take care of a lot of it, with Michael Gray sitting close by, making sure everything is working correctly as he sees it. And then in the week, Mondays, usually Laney will run the full rehearsal, and I'm down on the field teching. Tuesdays, it'll be a visual rehearsal, and I'm on the field teching. And Thursday, I usually run the rehearsal, and it's been such a great thing to see. Like, it doesn't matter who's in front of the kids; they all know this is Wando, and this is the way Wando does something. So whether we're doing a chamber group or the marching band, or our solo work with a piano accompanist, this is Wando, and this is what it means. So I think that our identity, I think Scott grew the identity outside our walls. I think we've tried to make our identity grow within our walls so that it always means something.
So when you talk about empowering all the other adults who are working with you too, and obviously that's good for your program and your students and for them. So I just learned about SLAM recently, right? Which is Leadership for Band Directors. So can you tell people a little bit about it?
It stands for Servant Leadership Association of Music. And that name was very intentional by Tim Lotzenheiser. There was a summit of some incredible leadership folks, and not just leaders, but they weren't just the talking heads. They were folks who their programs have done this, obviously through student leadership. Brian Christensen being one of them there. And just amazing, amazing people all brought together in Charlotte. And it was this idea of, we want to make sure that the words and lessons of Tim Lotzenheiser are always present, and that continues to permeate through our entire organization, whether Tim is there or not. And Tim was very instrumental, again, pun intended, in making this group and really fashioning it to the way that he wanted. Because I was one of the ones that would say, do we want to say servant leadership? That sounds... I remember Tim saying, yes, because it is servant leadership, Bobby, and this is what it has to be. It's like, oh, okay, got it. I understand, because it needed to be Tim's vision. So now we've taken that, and I think it started out as kind of helping some folks who were really struggling with student leadership. And now it still encompasses those people, but actually is also a thing. You think things are going really well. Let's show you how it can go even better. And sometimes that means you're letting go a little bit more. And sometimes it means you're directing a little bit more. And honestly, it's usually a combination of both. Let go of these areas, direct more of these areas, and then some really great things can happen. So that Servant Leadership Association is something I'm really proud to be a part of. And I think that it's, as people start to become part of, they call it the Slamily, which is a little, but I think it's great. I mean, because we have these Sunday evening meetings, and I have to admit, I'm like, oh boy, here we go. I got one more thing I've got to do. Turn it on. And Tim starts speaking. He does the opening, and you're like, oh, right. I need to keep the main thing, because I get overloaded with all the little details, and Tim helps to kind of refocus. Cecilia Clark is our president right now, and she has done a great job lining up guests to not only teach but inspire. I think it's an incredible endeavor that I cannot wait to see where it goes in the next few years. And
anyone can join anytime. I learned when I talked to Brian.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Just go look up. If you look up Servant Leadership Association of Music, it's right there. I think you put in Slam, a lot of other things come up. But if you put in Servant Leadership Association of Music, that comes out really well.
Again, I remember one of the old Dr. Tim videos that we watched. He always said the highest level of leadership is service.
Yeah, very much. It takes a long time to figure that out. I think young teachers think that can't be right. It can't be that. And unfortunately, we have had some maybe not great examples in the field of drum corps. And that's the place where it comes first, where, times changed and people didn't. Mm-hmm. And now the times force change, and rightly so. And I think that, now DCI especially has become a little bit more on the forefront of what's okay and what's not okay, coming out with statements and making sure that student and teacher accountability are at the forefront. We as teachers have felt that for a long time because, we've had so many make mistakes in those areas. And it makes me sad because we want to be treated like professionals. We better, by gosh, act like it. You can't demand professional respect if you can't do the one thing that humanity demands we do to one another, and that's not harm them. So yeah, I can get on a soapbox really fast on that one if we're not careful. So we probably best move on. But
and I saw recently you started a company, Lambert Leadership.
Well, actually, Lambert Leadership has been around for a long time. It was a thing where I go to schools, and I'll either work with your leadership team and you and your staff, because I think that was the disconnect with places. I'm going to come in and talk to the kids and get them riled up and then leave. Okay, well, that doesn't do anything. That's why I say I don't do motivational speaking. When I leave a place, I hope the kids are like, whoa, where do I begin? And that's where the teachers come in and say, here's the process. Here's what we do. So I'll either work with that, or I'll work with several schools all at one time. But again, giving them very much hands-on processes of how we engage and what we do. Most kids want to lead. They want to be in charge, but they don't know how. And so if they know how to do it, they actually are better followers for it in the long run too. Mm-hmm. So we do a lot of things like that. And that's really what Lambert Leadership was. I don't promote it very much because I have the same clients I've had for years upon years upon years. And I tell people, don't bring me in for 1 year. That's a waste of your time and mine, because I'll just get things started. But it takes 3 years to change a culture. I think it takes 3 years to do almost anything in a band program. You want to sight read better? It's going to take 3 years. You want to build respect? It's going to take 3 years. That's just what it is. You want to march better? 3 years. You can't do that in a month. And I think that's one of the things that directors sometimes don't understand. They think that there's a magic bullet. Like if I can just do this one thing, and we can certainly make strides for sure, but there has to be the care and feeding of this that just overlaps, and it can't be marching band is this, and then jazz band is completely different. Nope, those aren't sustainable. That's why you have those. The marching bands are really strong, but the rest of it is not, or vice versa. But when you can get everything into alignment and say, this is how we approach music with others. So Lambert leadership, as I said, it takes 3 years to change a culture. So bring me in for 3 years and we can really do some great things. And so I just kind of keep going back to these same places over and over. But about 2 months ago, I've been a product of therapy for the past 3 years, had a lot of things to deal with from my childhood and just some different things. And I have seen the power of one-on-one intentional therapy. It's completely changed the way that I think about a lot of things. And I thought, what do band directors have for this? Is there something? And you start, and coaching is a big, I hear podcasts with you. I am a life coach. I am a personal coach. I am a whatever. I don't know necessarily what that means for them, but for me, it was, I thought, what if a band director could have a coach? Mm-hmm. We talked about those mentors early on. I think those are great. But in the times in which we live now, we need something that's a little bit more intentional and a little bit more relevant. And here's what I mean by that. I did an interview earlier, and it talked about where do you find mentors? And I said, well, one of the first places is of course, your college directors. However, the more removed they have been from your particular situation, elementary music, middle school band, middle school strings, high school marching band, the more removed they are from that, the less specific advice they can give. They can give you generalities and they can give you, here's what it was like when I was there. But if you haven't taught COVID kids, COVID high school kids, or COVID middle school kids, wildly different.
Very.
Wildly different. And so when I hear some of the talking heads or some folks that haven't been in a classroom in 10 years saying, teachers, here's what you should just do, I take a little bit of offense at that. I think it's okay to encourage the teachers that are there, but don't espouse the way that we should approach the kids. You don't know. They are very different now. And I wouldn't say that they're worse. They are more about relationships than we've ever been. So I wanted to come beside these band directors in a weekly, biweekly, monthly basis and really dig into what are your skills? What do you do really well? And how can we empower you to empower students? I want to impact as many programs as possible. And I'm finding that I can do that by going out and working with the students, but I can even do it more directly by coaching these directors, getting to know them. What's been fun is it's not like your therapist. You know, I'll have them call and text all the time. It's not like people are, what's the difference between being a mentor and what you're doing with coaching? I'm like, well, to be really honest with you, when you are coaching someone, they are asking directly what they want. They are paying for your time, and you are spending time outside this conversation to make them better. Mentorship is we spend time together. You use the wealth of knowledge that I have. And then once our conversation is done, I may not hear from you again. Those are the two different things. I think both are valuable. We need them at different times in our career. But for me, I needed one-on-one coaching just for my life. And then as I work with these directors, and I work mostly with folks who have been teaching 3 years to 13 years, because I think there's a wide vacuum right now. Number one, that's a smaller percentage of people than it used to be. Mm-hmm. Number two, they've student taught in COVID, or they've taught their first year in COVID. And again, as we said, kids are different after COVID. Teachers are different after COVID. And that's why we saw a lot of people retire. And God love them. If I could have, maybe I would have. But it's a different ballgame. And we've got to play by different rules now. And we've got to be much more aware of each other. Instead of just competing with each other on Saturday, we've got to hold hands on Sunday and say, stay with us. We need you in this profession.
speaking of professional development, did you get to Midwest this year?
I did.
You did. So one of the, I looked at the clinics ahead of time and I wasn't able to get there. One of the ones that I really wanted to see was with someone who I interviewed last year. I think it was episode 81 with Matthew Arau. The importance of creating a culture of excellence in your band program, and he did it with Cecilia Clark, Paul Kyle, and Jonathan. Is it Glaw?
Glaive.
Glaive. Okay, so I appreciate that. Sorry, I apologize.
No.
So, were you able to make it to that session?
I actually introduced them.
You did.
I got to start the session. Yeah,
show us how much I know.
No, it's okay. It's all right. I wasn't supposed to.
Yeah.
That team, that's the Slam team from there. And we presented last year at that exact same time, as a matter of fact. And I remembered being there, and some of the other board members came, and we were just there to like greet people as they came in. We had some cards to give out. We just wanted to be of service. And so Cecilia came up and said, Bobby, we've got an hour's worth of material. It's 8:30 and the Midwest person isn't here to introduce us. Can you do it? I was like, I'll be brief, which is hard for me. But I had the pleasure of introducing them. It's a great session. You can actually go to the website and there are some handouts from that session that are really quite good. It's the idea of building a culture of excellence. We used to say we want to build, it's about creating culture. And the truth is every band program has a culture.
Sure.
And if there's something you don't like about it, guess whose fault it is? I mean, it is. It's your house. You're the one that's going to live there long after those students. And so if there's something that's going on that you don't particularly care for, you can't just stop it. Let me say that. I don't want to be flippant about it. You can't for example, at one point in our program, language was a real problem. And I would say that many band directors have experienced that. And I was like, well, they're kids and they're emerging. And then my daughter became a freshman. And actually, she marched in the band as an 8th grader, as did my 5th grade daughter. She was a little character in our show. So I was like, okay, I'm going to get a handle on this. And it wasn't a thing where I just, guys, you're never going to do this again. No, but I just said, let's talk about it. What do you think the words that we use say about us? What does that mean? Jerry Clower used to say something about people who can only use profanity prove how small and minuscule their vocabulary truly is.
Yep.
And he said it much, much funnier than what I just did right there. But we just started having conversations about it. And again, it took years. And it's not perfect, but the kids know that in the band room, that's not okay. We don't do that here. Out in the hallway, I can't control that as much. And if that's where you need to really express yourself, okay. But in here, we have a really high respect and regard for each other and ourselves. So that's what it's going to be.
Good.
So every band program has a culture, but that particular section was about a culture of excellence, which I think is different. Will using better language improve our B-flat concert scale? Not directly, but indirectly. That idea of having respect for yourself and for others and for what our craft is, that conspires to create a culture of excellence in the program.
And one thing that makes me think about is if you're selfish enough that you just use whatever language you want, but then you're made to think about other people in your language, right? So then when you're playing your B-flat scale, you're also thinking about other people too, and obviously you're going to have the better band.
Well, one of our leadership constructs is we talk about aim for understanding, AIM. Think about your audience, think about your intent, what do you really want to happen, and then think about your message. What are the words? What's the body language? How am I conveying my intent to this audience that I have defined? And that's where kids and teachers alike get caught. They just think about the intent. This is what I want. Okay, but who's listening to me and why should they? Because I'm standing in front of them as a teacher? That's That's dumb. That's not going to get it done. Because if it did, at your faculty meetings, you would be sitting with poise and absolute focus on that teacher that's at the front of the room. Well, we all know we don't. So that's where it is. Aim for understanding. If we do that in everything we do, then it translates into our music making as well.
All right, Bobby, I appreciate the time very much. If people want to reach out to you, how would they do that?
They can visit my website, lambertleadership.com. You can schedule an appointment to talk, or you can just send me an email at lambertleadership@gmail.com. Love to hear from folks, and I do my very best to answer anything and everything.
So a final question for today is going to be about programming. So is there a piece of music or a composer that you really love and you really wish people listen to?
Oh, I have several. I'm gonna try and be as brief and succinct as I can about this. One is John Philip Sousa. Why is that? Because I think that that's one of the truest forms of American music that we can do. And I hated them. I'm going to full disclosure. I hated marches until the Marine Band came out with their recordings and unpacked how you can work with marches. And so I have, working through those marches has made me a much better band director. Number two, Percy Grainger. The reason I say that is because there is everything musical in his compositions. I think that Lincolnshire Posy is probably my favorite piece to just sit and listen or prepare. I love both. And I love the different interpretations. Some people, oh, well, that's not the way that's. I've loved some different takes on those things. David Stanhope has done kind of a reimagining of the Lincolnshire Posy, and it really just taken some of those folk melodies and sort of played around with them. And it's really very cool. But I think then you look at Irish Tune, and then you look at Mark Morris. I just think that there's always room for Grainger in almost every concert. And I know sometimes we're like, well, but those are very well represented composers and all that. Viet Cong is one of my new favorite composers. He's just come out with some brilliant things. Diamond Tide was kind of the thing that brought him onto the surface. But he just won the Ravelli Award from NBA with Deciduous, I think is the name of the piece. And it just, incredible composer, brings really new sounds to the forefront. And I think that that's great. Kim Archer is out of Illinois, if I'm not mistaken, and has some really cool pieces that I think are worth exploring. I'll give you one last one, and I have the pleasure of working with him. His name is Andrew Blair. Dr. Blair is out of the University of Georgia, and he's also one of the band directors at Wando High School. But one of the pieces that people might recognize from him is a piece called Anti-Fanfare. He worked with Cynthia Johnston Turner at UGA, and she said, I love fanfares, except having to work with the brass. And if you knew Cynthia, you would know she was always very tongue-in-cheek about most things. And so he said, what if I could make a fanfare without brass? She said, nope, I don't think you can do it. And so he did. We got to perform it before Andrew ever came on board with us. I found the composition and I was like, this is perfect, because we played at the CBDNA NBA conference that was happening at the University of South Carolina. And the Koger Center, the recital hall there, has these amazing balconies. It has a full dress circle normally, but then it has two more balconies. And the top balcony is almost directly over the center of the auditorium. And I thought, man, things from up there would sound incredible. So we decided, one of our brass instructors, Dr. Justin Clarkson, he's kind of our brass caption head. And he's also a professional tuba player, so that doesn't hurt. But we talked about what brass fanfare would sound great up there. And Fanfare from La Prairie, the Ducat. I mean, just incredible. And so I came out on the stage. The kids stood up. We didn't have any brass players sitting on stage. They were all up there. Our kids sat down, and I just turned around and acted like I was going to start conducting. And all of a sudden, you hear from the balcony that Fanfare from La Prairie. but it's a 4-minute walk from there all the way back down. And I found anti-fanfare for woodwinds and percussion. And it is fantastic. Jerry Junkin has done it. So many other people have performed this piece. It's just, I think it's fun, but it's substantive too. And he's got several compositions that are out, especially for brass band. And he's got one that he's coming out with called Transactions. And it's all based on the sounds the ATM machines would make and different cash apps and different, like, I didn't know that until I heard the piece. I was like, man, that's really cool. He goes, did you get it? I'm like, crap. No. He said, listen to this. And then he played something on his phone. I was like, oh my God, that's the melody from there. He's like, yeah, all of it's called Transactions, but they're all from this. And I love clever, substantial compositions. I love pieces that make you think. Final one, Leslie Gilreath. We performed this piece at Midwest called From Whence They Came. 2019 happened to also be the 400th anniversary of the first slave ship to come to the Americas. Mm-hmm. And he did a brilliant reimagining of Mary Had a Baby and We Shall Overcome, and kind of pulled them together into, I think, just a masterwork. And actually, Laney conducted that on our Midwest concert. And it's one of my favorite things to listen to. Again, makes you think.
We sincerely appreciate you taking your valuable time and listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. Your students are very lucky to have a band director like you. If you have any suggestions for episode topics or think you have an area of expertise to share on a show with us, please reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.